I want you to close your eyes for a second and just transport yourself back to 1948. We're in Lehringen, Germany.
Right, post-war Germany.
Yeah, exactly. And I want you to picture this. There's a group of amateur excavators, and they're working in this commercial fertilizer quarry. So they're digging through these incredibly dense, muddy layers of earth, and suddenly their shovels hit something massive.
Something you definitely don't expect to find in a fertilizer pit.
No, not at all. They clear away the mud, and they reveal this fully intact skeleton of a straight-tusked elephant. And, just to be clear for everyone listening, this isn't your average zoo elephant.
Oh, not even close. This is the largest land mammal known to have ever roamed Europe during the Pleistocene. I mean, it absolutely dwarfs modern African elephants.
Right, it's just a behemoth. But here's the thing. The sheer size of the bones is not even the crazy part.
Not by a long shot. Because right there, nestled intimately between the massive ribs of this giant, the excavators pull out a fully intact 2.38-meter-long wooden spear.
It's just wild to think about. I mean, it sounds like the ultimate archaeological snapshot, right? Like an absolute smoking gun for human history.
It really does.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. For this deep dive, we're going to unpack a stack of newly published research from a 2026 edition of Scientific Reports, and it completely reopens this 125,000-year-old cold case.
It's such a fascinating paper.
It really is.
Yeah.
We're going to look at why this famous Lehringen discovery was actually doubted by science for decades, how modern zooarchaeology finally cracked the case, and why these findings totally shatter that old stereotype of Neanderthals as just these primitive, stumbling scavengers.
Because the stakes here are incredibly high for our understanding of human evolution. For decades, this so-called Lehringen spear was held up in textbooks as the clearest evidence of Neanderthal hunting prowess.
Right, the ultimate proof.
But there was a massive problem with the evidence itself because, as you mentioned, this was essentially a commercial mining operation in 1948. It was not a systematic scientific dig.
Yeah, it was trying to get fertilizer.
Exactly. So there were no proper photographs taken of the spear exactly as it lay in the ground, and there were no reliable stratigraphy drawings.
And that's how archaeologists map the distinct layers of soil, right? To establish a clear timeline of how things were buried.
Yes, precisely. Without that, you lose the context.
So imagine finding the absolute holy grail for human history, but the crime scene was so poorly documented that nobody actually believes you.
Which is incredibly frustrating, but you have to admit, the skeptics actually had a valid point about this.
They did. Before we get into the new high-tech evidence from 2026, we do have to look at the messy reality of that 1948 dig, because the contamination of the site was a real issue.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the team back in the 40s did the best they could under chaotic circumstances, but they were literally extracting marl pen, which is a type of calcium-rich mud.
Right, they weren't using little brushes and dental picks like you see in movies.
No, not at all. Shovels and heavy labor. And on top of that, when researchers later looked really closely at the tip of that famous wooden spear, they found extensive wear and tear on it.
Wait, like it was blunted?
Yeah, it was blunted in a way that made some scientists argue it wasn't even a hunting weapon at all.
Okay, wait, if it's not a spear, what did they think it was?
Well, they suggested it might have been a multi-purpose tool. Maybe a heavy digging stick for foraging deep roots, or perhaps like a snow probe.
A snow probe?
Yeah, and the argument was that maybe this Neanderthal tool simply washed down a paleo river and floated right next to a naturally deceased elephant by pure coincidence.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second.
Okay.
Because the skepticism makes total sense when you frame it that way.
Correct.
I mean, if I find a crowbar sitting next to a broken bank vault, I'm going to safely assume it's a burglary tool.
A logical conclusion, yeah.
Right. But if I find a crowbar in a completely flooded basement, just drifting next to a broken bank vault, well, maybe it just floated there from the garage.
Yeah.
The context changes everything.
Exactly. The flooded basement ruins the clear connection.
So without any photos or precise soil maps of the original dig, how can scientists today possibly prove it wasn't just a random coincidence?
Well, the breakthrough is that researchers essentially stopped arguing about the missing dirt from the quarry. They realized the answer was hidden in the bones themselves.
The bones that were just sitting in a museum.
Yes, the elephant bones had been sitting in the Domherrenhaus Museum in Germany, just preserved in drawers for decades. So a team led by Ivo Verheijen at the Lower Saxony State Office for Heritage recently ran the first systematic zooarchaeological analysis of the entire faunal assemblage.
Meaning the complete collection of all the animal bones found at the site.
Right. They moved from the muddy original excavation to the pristine modern laboratory, and they started looking for microscopic clues. Things that the naked eye and certainly a 1948 shovel would have completely missed.
This is where we get to the massive aha moment of the new study. Because they didn't just look at the spear, they essentially performed a forensic autopsy on a 125,000-year-old elephant.
Which is just incredible science.
It really is. But how do you even begin to do that?
Well, you start by establishing the victim's profile. The researchers examined the elephant's teeth, specifically looking at the molar wear, and they looked at the degree of bone fusion in the skeleton.
Because bones fuse at specific ages, just like in humans.
Exactly, just like in modern forensics. They determined this was a male, probably around 30 years old, and he would have weighed somewhere around 3,500 kilograms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that means he was in the absolute prime of his life.
Right. So a massive, healthy, prime-age bull elephant like that does not simply drop dead at the edge of a lake for no reason.
Precisely. But the undeniable smoking gun wasn't just his age. It was what they found on the ribs.
Okay, tell me about the ribs.
When the researchers put these rib fragments under high-powered microscopes, they identified very specific cut marks. But, and this is the crucial part, not just anywhere on the rib. The cut marks were on the internal face of the rib cage.
Wait, cut marks on the inside of the ribs?
Yes, on the inside.
I'm trying to visualize this. The only way you reach the interior of the rib cage is if you've already cracked the animal wide open. Are you saying the Neanderthals were literally climbing inside the carcass?
That is exactly what it means, and it matters immensely because of what it demands physically. To make microscopic cut marks on the inside of the thorax, the butchers literally had to be working from inside the chest cavity.
That's intense.
And you can only do that if the carcass is completely fresh.
Because if it wasn't fresh, like if it had been sitting there, what happens?
Well, if they were just wandering by a week later, scavenging a corpse that a pack of wolves had left behind, the internal organs would be a toxic, bloated, rotting mess.
Oh, right. So you definitely wouldn't be meticulously scraping the inside of the ribs.
Exactly. The location of these marks proves they were actively eviscerating a freshly killed animal to get immediate access to the nutrient-rich internal organs. You know, the liver, the heart, the lungs.
That is wild to visualize.
Right.
I mean, you're standing inside the rib cage of a 3,500-kilogram animal you just brought down. But wait, an elephant's hide is incredibly thick?
Yeah.
How do we know for sure they were using stone tools to do this and not just tearing at it?
Because of what was found near the elephant's skull, they found 25 Baltic flint flakes.
Okay.
And this is where the science gets really fascinating, because the researchers didn't just say, oh, look, sharp rocks. They conducted use-wear analysis on them.
How does that work? I mean, how do you know what a rock was cutting 125,000 years ago?
So, under a microscope, flint that has been used to scrape meat and soft tissue develops a very specific micropolish.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the friction of slicing through fat and muscle leaves these tiny microscopic striations that look entirely different from, say, a tool used to whittle wood or scrape dry hides. And the edges of these 25 flakes had use-wear patterns entirely consistent with defleshing fresh meat.
Okay, so they have the butchery tools right there next to the body.
Yes, but here's the real kicker. There were no larger stone cores found at the site.
Wait, meaning what? They didn't make the tools there.
Exactly. When you make flint tools, you strike a large rock with the core and knock off smaller flakes. It leaves a pile of debris, right?
Yeah, like stone shavings.
Right. But there was no debris here. That means the Neanderthals didn't just stumble upon a dead elephant, sit down and start making tools from scratch to deal with it. They manufactured these butchery tools somewhere else, entirely off-site, and deliberately brought them to the carcass.
Wow. I want you, the listener, to think about the sheer logistics of what is being described here. If you were processing 3,500 kilograms of meat, fat, and organs, you have a ticking clock.
A very fast ticking clock.
You have to do it fast before every other apex predator in the Pleistocene smells the blood and comes running. You can't waste time making knives. You bring them with you.
And that requires extreme coordination. It requires intense teamwork.
It proves that Neanderthals got there first. They were the apex predators who killed this elephant.
And that completely dismantles the old narrative. They weren't just surviving on the margins, hoping to find a dead animal. They were actively dominating their environment.
Which forces us to look really closely at the murder weapon, because taking down a prime-age straight-tusked elephant requires way more than just sharp rocks.
It requires serious engineering.
Yes. Let's look at the specs of this spear, because it's an absolute marvel. It's 2.38 meters long, which is almost 8 feet. But what is truly remarkable is the material itself. It wasn't just a heavy branch they snapped off a tree. It was crafted from the trunk of a yew tree.
Yes, the trunk itself. And the choice of wood is absolutely vital here.
It's like engineering a custom carbon fiber hunting bow.
Hmm.
I mean, anyone who knows medieval history knows that yew is the exact same wood used to make the famous English longbows thousands of years later.
Right, because of its unique properties.
They chose it because the wood is incredibly dense, but it's flexible. It absorbs massive kinetic impact. If you thrust a rigid pine stick into a charging elephant, it just shatters into a million splinters when it hits bone. But yew bends and penetrates.
It's biomechanically perfect for a thrusting weapon. And to achieve that perfection, the Neanderthal maker had to deliberately carve away up to 39 separate knots and side branches from that raw trunk.
39 knots.
Yeah, they had to shave it all down to create a smooth, aerodynamic, perfectly balanced weapon.
I am just picturing the amount of labor that goes into shaving off 39 branches with a piece of chipped flint. I mean, that takes days.
It takes immense time, but more importantly, it takes profound cognitive ability. This raises an essential point about Neanderthal intelligence.
How so?
Well, the time investment required to locate the right yew tree, chop down the solid trunk, and painstakingly trim 39 branches, that implies deep forward planning. It implies abstract thought.
Right, they had a vision for it.
Exactly. They had a clear conception of the tool's intended use long before the hunt actually took place.
They weren't just reacting to a sudden threat in their environment. They were actively preparing for it. They were designing specialized tech. And we know from the use wear on the spear, that blunting the skeptics pointed out earlier, that it had been used repeatedly before it finally ended up wedged in the ribs of that elephant at Lehringen.
Yes. It wasn't a makeshift tool. It was a trusted, heavily engineered piece of gear.
It's part of their standard toolkit.
Exactly.
Okay, so the elephant and the spear represent this one spectacularly successful dramatic event, right? We've established they're apex hunters. But as I was reading through the new study, what really blew my mind is how the researchers didn't stop at the elephant.
Oh, the rest of the site is just as important.
Right. The faunal assemblage, the rest of the bones from the site, it totally reframes Lehringen as something much bigger than just a single lucky elephant hunt.
That is the real paradigm shift in this 2026 paper. When you look at the different stratigraphic layers at the site, you find a whole menagerie of other animal bones showing clear signs of Neanderthal butchery.
And the list is incredibly diverse. They found the remains of aurochs. And for those listening who might not know, an auroch is essentially an extinct wild cow. But imagine a cow that is massive, heavily horned, and incredibly aggressive.
Not a docile pasture animal at all. It's a dangerous beast.
Yeah, and the bones had clear-cut marks from defleshing. They also found a brown bear whose femur had been deliberately smashed open to extract the bone marrow.
Which is an entirely different type of hunting strategy. I mean, taking down an elephant requires mobbing and heavy thrusting spears. Ambushing a brown bear requires completely different tactics and risk calculation.
And it gets even more specialized, right? They found beavers with very specific cut marks on their jaws and pelvises. Alongside all of that, remains of pike, pond turtles, and massive Wells catfish.
It's a huge variety.
So I have to ask, what does this all mean? We always hear about Neanderthals hunting mammoths and big game in the freezing cold. Why are they bothering with semi-aquatic rodents like beavers? Or picking a fight with a dangerous brown bear when there's an elephant around?
To understand that, we have to look at the harsh reality of human biology. There is a physiological condition often referred to as rabbit starvation or protein poisoning.
Protein poisoning, what is that?
So if you are surviving in a harsh environment and eating only very lean meat like rabbit or deer muscle, your liver literally cannot process the proteins fast enough to convert them into usable energy.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you will actually starve to death with a full stomach. Your body absolutely needs lipids. It needs fat to survive. To survive the extreme conditions of the Pleistocene, Neanderthals needed massive amounts of fat and marrow.
Oh, wow. I want you listening to think about the last time you went hiking or working outside in the bitter cold. You don't crave a light salad, right? You crave dense, heavy, fatty foods. Your body just screams for calories.
Exactly. Your biology demands it.
If you're out there in the ancient wilderness trying to survive on lean meat, you're doomed. So it's not just about the volume of calories, it's about the type of calories.
Exactly. Now look at that prey list again through the lens of fat. Bears in the autumn are packing on maximum weight for hibernation, so their marrow is incredibly rich. Beavers have incredibly fatty tissues.
And elephants are basically walking fat reserves.
Right. These animals share a common dietary appeal, extreme high-fat content.
And the beavers aren't just for eating, right? Because hunting a giant Pleistocene beaver requires a totally different approach. You're probably setting traps or ambushing them at the water's edge.
Yes, and the cut marks on the beaver jaws and pelvises indicate highly meticulous skinning, not just hacking off meat.
For their pelts.
Exactly. Beaver fur is incredibly dense and naturally waterproof. So you have Neanderthals trapping or hunting beavers for water-resistant coats, smashing bare bones for high-calorie marrow, and taking down the largest land mammals in Europe for massive fat reserves.
That paints such a profoundly different picture. They weren't just rigid, single prey hunters who chased big game until they went extinct. They were highly adaptable opportunists.
They were master trackers who understood the specific behaviors of entirely different species.
They understood their ecosystem intimately.
They really did. And the site at Lehringen was actually situated around a former paleo lake during a warm interglacial period called the Eemian. This means the climate was actually relatively mild at the time, and this lake was essentially a seasonal supermarket.
A seasonal supermarket. I love that term for it.
It fits perfectly. The Neanderthals recognized that this body of water concentrated resources: fish, turtles, thirsty herbivores, fatty beavers. And they kept returning to this specific spot in the landscape across multiple seasons, maybe even across generations, to exploit whatever the environment offered at that specific time of year.
So let's wrap this up, because the journey we've gone on here is incredible. We started with a 125,000-year-old spear pulled out of a muddy fertilizer pit by amateurs in 1948.
A literal cold case.
Yeah, and for decades, it was written off by the scientific community as a possible coincidence. But now, it has been fully vindicated by modern forensic zooarchaeology. The microscopic cut marks on the inside of the elephant's ribs prove early primary access by a coordinated team.
Which absolutely buries the idea that Neanderthals were just stumbling scavengers.
Not at all. They were strategic, cooperative engineers capable of taking down the largest land mammal in Europe. And at the exact same time, they were trapping beavers for waterproof coats and smashing bare bones for marrow.
They were absolute masters of their domain.
And this is why this deep dive matters to you, listening right now. It forces us to take a hard look at our own inherent biases.
That's such an important point.
Because for a very long time, modern humans have had this tendency to view early human species as inherently inferior. We like to think of evolution as this straight, clean line from primitive and dumb to modern and smart.
But the Lehringen site proves that Neanderthals possessed a deep, incredibly complex understanding of their ecology.
Right. They had the technological foresight to craft custom U-spears and the advanced nutritional knowledge to target fat-rich animals to prevent protein poisoning. They weren't inferior. They were perfectly adapted apex predators.
They were brilliant in their own context.
Which leaves me with one final, lingering question for you to mull over. The Lehringen spear and this massive elephant were dug up by a group of amateurs in a fertilizer quarry back in 1948. And it took almost 80 years for science to truly understand what they actually found.
Because the technology just wasn't there yet.
Exactly. So what other incredible world-changing stories of early humanity are currently sitting in dusty museum drawers, quietly waiting for the right technology to come along and finally decode them?
It makes you wonder how much history is just waiting to be rediscovered.
It really does. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.